My friend Maria, she works from home as a freelance graphic designer. So she's in her apartment pretty much 24/7. Knows the comings and goings of her building, the Parkview residences, like the back of her hand. It's a fairly new building, decent security with key fobs and an intercom. But like any big anonymous apartment block, you don't really know all your neighbors, do you? The apartment directly across the hall from hers, Unit 6B, had been vacant for a good 3 months after the previous tenants, a young couple who argued a lot, finally moved out. Maria knew it was empty. She'd seen the landlord, a shifty guy named Mr. Henderson, showing it to prospective renters a few times, but apparently no one had taken it yet. There were always little stories, bits of gossip on their building's online community forum about phantom tenants in some units or apartments being used for short-term stays by people who weren't on any lease stuff that wasn't exactly above board, but hard to prove. It started about a month after 6B became officially, undeniably vacant. Maria was working at her desk, which by chance faces her front door, giving her a clear view of the peephole. She heard a knock, not on her door, but on the door of 6B across the hall. Curious, wondering if maybe new tenants had finally moved in without her noticing, she got up and looked through her peephole. A guy in a generic-looking delivery uniform, think a plain blue shirt, dark pants, a baseball cap pulled low, but no obvious company logo like UPS or FedEx, was standing there holding a standard-sized pizza box. He knocked again on 6B, looking impatient, then peered up and down the empty hallway. After waiting for about a minute, he shrugged, leaned the pizza box against the door of 6B, and hurried off towards the elevator. Maria thought it was decidedly odd. Who orders a pizza to a vacant apartment? Maybe a prank by some local kids? Later that evening, when Maria went to take out her trash, the pizza box was gone. A few days later, another delivery to 6B. This time, it was a different guy, though with a similarly generic, unbranded uniform, holding a small cellophane-wrapped floral arrangement. Same routine. Knock on 6B, wait a bit, look confused or annoyed, then leave the flowers propped against the door. Later, when Maria checked, the flowers were gone. This started happening with increasing, unsettling regularity, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, at different times of the day. Different delivery people, sometimes men, sometimes women, always in those nondescript, almost costume-like uniforms that didn't quite look legitimate. Sometimes it was takeout food containers, sometimes small, unmarked packages, sometimes just a plain white envelope. They'd always knock on 6B, look around furtively as if checking if they were being watched, and if no one answered, they'd either leave the item by the door, or more disturbingly, Maria would sometimes see them try the doorknob of 6B very gently, very quickly, as if testing to see if it was unlocked. If Maria happened to open her own door to get her mail from the communal mailbox downstairs or take out her recycling while one of these deliveries was happening, the delivery person would act strangely, either becoming overly, almost aggressively apologetic about disturbing the wrong apartment, so, sorry, my mistake. Or they give her a hard, suspicious, appraising stare before leaving very quickly, almost running for the elevator. Maria started to get a really bad, persistent feeling about this. This wasn't just a series of unfortunate misdeliveries by incompetent drivers. This was something else, something coordinated, something wrong. She mentioned it to the building superintendent, Mr. Davies, a lazy, unhelpful, seen-it-all kind of guy who always seemed to be annoyed by tenant complaints. He barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. Probably just new delivery drivers getting the address wrong, love, he said, waving a dismissive hand. Happens all the time in a big building like this. Or maybe someone is subletting it on the sly from the old tenants and hasn't told me. Not my problem unless they start causing real trouble or not paying their fees. Classic Mr. Davies. But Maria knew no one was living in 6B. She never heard any sounds of normal occupancy. No TV, no music, no voices, no vacuum cleaner. Except sometimes, very late at night, if she was up working on a tight deadline, she'd hear faint, muffled, almost stealthy noises from across the hall. A soft thud, like something heavy but padded being set down. A faint scraping sound, like a piece of furniture being moved very carefully, very slowly across the floor. Or what sounded like very low, hushed, urgent voices, too indistinct to make out words, but definitely human. It was enough to make her skin crawl. Those vague stories from the building's online forum about certain units being used for illicit purposes, for things other than living, started to feel less like harmless gossip and more like a chilling, unfolding possibility right across her hallway. The whole situation felt like it was escalating, like an unspoken, unseen operation was taking place. Was the vacant apartment being used as a dead drop for illegal goods? Drugs? Stolen items being fenced? Were the delivery people actually couriers or mules in some kind of criminal network, using the empty, unsuspecting unit as a temporary, deniable exchange point, a safe house for their transactions? The sheer variety of deliveries, food, flowers, small anonymous packages, envelopes suggested it wasn't just one type of illicit trade, but perhaps several or something very well disguised. Maria, getting increasingly alarmed, started taking photos with her phone through her peephole whenever one of these deliveries occurred. The images were often blurry due to the low light in the hallway and the quick movements of the individuals. Their faces frequently obscured by caps or masks, but it was a record, a pattern of suspicious activity. She also started keeping a detailed log, dates, times, descriptions of the delivery people, what they were delivering, any unusual behavior. One evening, a delivery was different, more brazen. A woman, dressed in a slightly more professional-looking, but still unbranded dark blue courier uniform, arrived carrying a larger, heavier-looking, securely taped cardboard box. She knocked on 6B, waited only a few seconds. Then, when no one answered, she didn't just leave it. She pulled out a key from her pocket, calmly unlocked the door to 6B, and went inside with the package. Maria watched, heart pounding, through her peephole. The woman was in there for maybe 10 minutes. Maria could hear faint movements, the sound of tape being ripped, a muffled conversation. Then the woman came out empty-handed, relocked the door to 6B with the key, gave a quick, nervous glance up and down the hallway, and left quickly. This was a whole new level of wrong. Someone, or several someones, had a key to a supposedly vacant apartment and were actively using it for something. This wasn't just leaving things at the door. This was an active, unauthorized occupation and use of the premises. Maria was terrified, but also felt she had to do something. This was happening right across from her. What if these people were dangerous? What if they realized she was observing them, taking photos? She called the police non-emergency line again, her voice trembling but determined. She explained everything she'd seen over the past weeks. The consistent pattern of suspicious deliveries, the woman with the key, the late-night noises she'd heard. She offered her photos and her detailed logs as potential evidence. This time, perhaps because of the detail, the persistence, and the clear indication of unauthorized access with a key, they seemed to take it more seriously. A few days later, Maria saw plainclothes detectives in her hallway, talking to a very flustered-looking Mr. Davies. and then going into apartment 6B with him. Later that afternoon, one of the detectives came and spoke to Maria, took her formal statement, and looked at her photos and logs with interest. They didn't tell her much, of course, just that they were investigating a confidential matter and appreciated her vigilance. Apartment 6B was officially sealed off by the police for a while after that, with yellow tape across the door. The strange deliveries stopped completely. The late-night noises from across the hall ceased. Eventually, many weeks later, after the police tape was gone, a new, legitimate-looking and very noisy family with 2 small children moved into 6B. Maria never found out the full official story. Was it a drug distribution ring using the apartment as a local hub? A fencing operation for stolen goods? Were people being held there against their will? The police were predictably tight-lipped, and Mr. Davies suddenly became very forgetful whenever she asked. But when Maria told her friends about the whole ordeal, after it was all over, most of them were still somewhat skeptical about the initial creepy phase before the woman with the key. See? It was probably just the landlord or his agents letting different people use it for legitimate storage or short-term emergency housing. And they were just bad at communicating, one friend suggested. He probably got worked up over nothing much until that woman actually used the key. They didn't understand the chilling, cumulative effect of those repeated, furtive deliveries. The feeling of being adjacent to something hidden, unknown, and potentially very dangerous. The way it made her own home feel unsafe, violated by proximity. It taught Maria that sometimes the most significant signs of trouble, of something seriously wrong, are not one big dramatic event, but a series of small, individually explainable or ambiguous occurrences that only form a truly terrifying picture when you see them all together as a pattern. And that often, the scariest things in an apartment building aren't what you see directly, but what you don't quite see, what you almost hear happening just behind a closed door in an apartment that's supposed to be empty. It makes you look at every vacant sign, every anonymous delivery person, with a whole new level of suspicion and unease. So, I'm a freelance writer, which basically means my work hours are completely insane. Sometimes I'm up all night, hammering away at a deadline, fueled by coffee and desperation. Other times, I can sleep half the day away. My apartment building, the Crescent Arms, is one of those older 6-story brick places. You see a lot of in the city, nothing special, but the walls are reasonably thick, which is usually a good thing for someone like me who needs quiet to concentrate. Or so I thought. There had always been some talk around the building, the kind of hushed, slightly nervous stories people tell in the elevator or the laundry room about the quiet floor, the 5th floor, which happened to be where I lived, and how tenants there sometimes acted a bit strange or never seemed to stay for their full lease. I never paid it much mind, just dismissed it as typical building gossip. About 6 months ago, the apartment directly next to mine, 5B, which had been empty for a good while, finally got a new tenant. I only saw him once or twice in the hallway in those first few weeks. A guy who introduced himself as Arthur, maybe in his late 50s, thin, almost gaunt with pale, papery skin and eyes that always looked a bit disheveled and profoundly anxious, like he hadn't slept properly in days or weeks. He'd just nod curtly if our paths crossed, then scurry inside his apartment, locking the door quickly behind him. Fine by me, honestly. I like my peace and quiet, and I'm not much for neighborly chit-chat anyway. Then the knocking started. It was always late, really, really late. like 2 or 3 in the morning, when I was usually deep in my work, the rest of the building silent as a tomb or trying to be. A series of soft, almost timid taps on my front door. The first time it happened, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I figured it was a mistake, someone on the wrong floor, maybe drunk. I looked through the peephole. It was Arthur, my new neighbor from 5B. He looked even more agitated and wild-eyed than usual, his thin hair sticking up, his eyes darting around the empty hallway. I opened the door a crack, leaving the security chain firmly on. "Yeah? Everything okay, Arthur? It's pretty late." "Oh, Mark, I am so terribly sorry to bother you at this ungodly hour," he whispered, his voice raspy and strained. Like he'd been shouting or crying. I seem to have run completely out of sugar. And all the stores are closed now, of course. You wouldn't happen to have a cup I could borrow, would you? For my nightly tea? I can't sleep without it. Sugar? At 2 o'clock in the morning? It was undeniably weird. A bit pathetic. But he looked so genuinely pathetic, so utterly distressed over a cup of sugar, I actually felt sorry for him. I went to my kitchen and got him a small Ziploc bag of sugar. He thanked me profusely, almost fawningly, his gratitude way over the top for a bit of sugar, and then he disappeared back into his apartment. As he did, I noticed with a little prickle of unease that his apartment was completely dark behind him. No lights on at all, not even a flicker from a TV. Strange. A few nights later, another knock. Same time, same soft, hesitant pattern. This time, he needed a single A battery for his smoke detector, which he claimed was chirping him deaf and driving him mad. Again, his apartment behind him was pitch black. Again, he looked like he was on the verge of a complete panic attack over this minor inconvenience. I rummaged around and found him a battery. This became a deeply unsettling pattern. Every few nights, a late-night knock. Arthur, needing something trivial, something easily obtainable during normal hours. Aspirin for a splitting headache. A can opener because his had just broken. To use my phone for a quick, urgent call because his was dead. And the charger was mysteriously broken. Each time, his apartment was pitch black, a silent void. Each time, he looked more strung out, more desperate, his requests more urgent, his gratitude more effusive and unsettlingly intense. And each time, without fail, he'd try to peer past me into my apartment, his eyes scanning the room quickly, furtively, before I could shut the door. It felt like he was checking for something, or someone. I started to get a really bad, creeping feeling about all this. This wasn't normal neighborly behavior, not by a long shot. This was something else. Something was very wrong with Arthur, or with his situation. The quiet floor stories, the ones about strange tenants, started to seem less like quaint building folklore and more like a potential unfolding warning. Was Arthur involved in something shady? Drugs, maybe, given his appearance and erratic behavior? Was he using these bizarre late-night requests as an excuse to check if I was home, if I was alone? Was he casing my apartment for a future robbery? The thought made my skin crawl, made my own apartment feel less safe. I tried not answering the door a couple of times, pretending to be asleep or out. The knocking would just get more insistent, more frantic, sometimes accompanied by low, desperate-sounding whispers of my name through the thin wood. "Mark? Mark, please, I really need your help. It's an emergency this time, I swear." It was incredibly unnerving, lying there in the dark, listening to him, wondering what he'd do next. I'd usually end up opening it, just to make him go away, my heart pounding, my patience wearing thin. One night, he knocked, even later than usual, around 3:30 a.m., You look terrible. Sweating profusely despite the cool night, trembling like a leaf. Mark, he hissed through the door, his voice urgent, terrified. I need to come in. Just for a minute. Please. There are people outside, in the hallway, watching my apartment. I think they followed me home earlier. That was it for me. This had crossed a serious line from merely weird and annoying to potentially very dangerous. Arthur, I said, trying to keep my voice firm, authoritative, despite the tremor I felt inside. I can't let you in. If you genuinely think you're in danger, you need to call the police right now. No police. He whispered frantically, his eyes wide with a raw animal terror. You don't understand. They'll know I called. They'll get me. Please, Mark. Just for a little while. I need to hide. They won't look for me in here. He started to jiggle my doorknob, testing it. I slammed the deadbolt home with a decisive thud. I'm sorry, Arthur. I can't. Call the cops. That's your only option. I backed away from the door, my own heart racing, wondering if I should call the cops. I heard him whimpering outside for a few minutes, maybe even a soft thud against the door. Then eventually, silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, jumping at every creak and groan in the old building, convinced those people Arthur mentioned might try my door next. The next morning I was exhausted, on edge, and angry. I decided I had to talk to the building superintendent, try to get some official intervention. I told him about Arthur's increasingly erratic late-night visits, his strange behavior, my growing fear that he was involved in something dangerous or was dangerously unstable himself. The super, a gruff, seen-it-all old guy named Sal, just sighed heavily, like I was the 10th tenant to complain about something that week. Yeah, that fella in 5B. Always something with him, isn't there? Pays his rent on time, though. That's the main thing for the landlord. Look, kid, he's probably just a bit eccentric. Maybe got some mental health issues, you know? As long as he's not directly threatening you or damaging building property, there's not much I can officially do. Just keep your door locked tight. So, no help there. No one I talked to, not Sal, not my friends, believed it was anything more than a bit eccentric or sadly disturbed. I felt completely alone with this creeping, insidious dread. Was Arthur a victim genuinely scared of someone or something? Or was he the one I should be scared of? Was he trying to lure me into a dangerous situation? Or use my apartment for some illicit purpose? Or was he simply losing his mind? The ambiguity, the not knowing, was terrifying. A few days later, Arthur was gone. Just vanished. His door was slightly ajar one morning when I was leaving for a rare early appointment. I cautiously peeked in. The apartment was completely empty, stripped bare. Not a stick of furniture, not a scrap of paper, not a trace he'd ever been there except for a faint, lingering, sharp chemical smell, almost like industrial cleaner. Or something else I couldn't quite place, but that reminded me of a story I'd heard about a bus stop encounter years ago. No forwarding address, no note, nothing. He just disappeared as mysteriously and silently as he'd lived there. I never found out what Arthur's deal really was. Was he running from someone dangerous? Was he involved in dealing drugs from that dark apartment? Was he just a deeply disturbed, paranoid individual whose reality had fractured? I don't know. But those late night knocks, that desperate, hunted look in his eyes, the constant feeling that I was teetering on the edge of being dragged into something dark and dangerous just by being his neighbor, that stays with me. It makes you wonder about the people living just a thin wall away from you. What secrets they keep locked behind their doors, what dangers they might represent, wittingly or unwittingly. And it makes those old building stories about strange tenants and cursed floors feel a lot less like harmless fiction and a lot more like a grim reflection of unseen realities. Sometimes the real horror is not knowing who your neighbors truly are or what they're capable. I'm a light sleeper. Always have been. The slightest noise, a car door slamming down the street, the cat jumping off the bed, can wake me up. Which is why living in an apartment building, the metro lofts, can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. Especially with neighbors who have a different definition of quiet hours. My downstairs neighbors, the ones in apartment 2A, directly below my bedroom, were a young couple, probably in their late 20s, who, shall we say, like to entertain. Not every night, thank God, but maybe once or twice a month, usually on a Friday or Saturday. They'd throw what sounded like a pretty lively party. They weren't crazy riggers, not usually, just loud. Music with a heavy bass that throbbed up through my floorboards, muffled but persistent laughter and shouting. The occasional sound of furniture being dragged or something heavy being dropped. I'd usually just sigh, pop in my best earplugs, turn on a white noise machine, and try to ignore it. Most of the other tenants in the building had a sort of unspoken tolerance for it, as long as it didn't go too late into the wee hours. There were always whispers in the building, though. The kind of vague, unsubstantiated gossip you hear in shared laundry rooms. That the parties in 2A were a bit more than just friendly get-togethers. Hints of something edgier. Maybe some heavy recreational drug use. Or even low-stakes illegal gambling. But nothing anyone could ever prove or was willing to officially complain about. Just that typical apartment building gossip. That vague, uneasy sense that something was slightly off, slightly out of place. With the folks in 2A this one particular Saturday night. The party in 2A started around 10 p.m., right on schedule it seemed. The familiar, unwelcome bass throbbed up through my floorboards, vibrating my bed slightly. I could hear the indistinct murmur of many voices, punctuated by occasional loud laughter or a shouted exclamation. I sighed, put on my noise-canceling headphones, cranked up some calming ambient music, and tried to read my book, hoping they'd wind it down by a reasonable hour. Around 1 the noise level was still pretty high, maybe even a bit louder, more boisterous. I was just starting to drift off to sleep despite the headphones and the thumping. Then it stopped, abruptly, utterly, not a gradual winding down. Like people starting to leave or the music being turned down notch by notch. It was like someone had flipped a giant switch, cutting off all sound instantaneously. 1 second, bumping bass and loud, drunken chatter. The next, absolute, dead, profound silence. The kind of sudden, unnatural silence that's far more unnerving, far more alarming than the noise it replaces. It was like the air pressure in my apartment changed. I immediately took off my headphones, my senses on high alert. Nothing, not a peep. No music, no voices, no footsteps, no closing doors, nothing. It was eerie. I've lived above partiers before, plenty of times. Parties don't just stop like that, instantaneously. In the middle of a song, in the middle of a laugh. They fade out. People say their loud, drunken goodbyes, stumble out into the hallway, call for Ubers. This was different. This was a sudden, unnatural, almost vacuum-like void of sound from the apartment directly below me. I lay there in bed, stock still, listening intently, my own heart beating a little too fast in the sudden, oppressive quiet. Maybe they'd all just passed out simultaneously, highly unlikely, or maybe they'd all decided to suddenly go out to a late night club. Possible, but again, you'd expect to hear some noise, some commotion of people leaving, doors opening and closing. But the silence from 2A was so complete, so absolute. It felt wrong. I couldn't even hear the usual creaks and groans of people moving around that you normally hear in an apartment building, even a quiet one. It was as if the apartment below me and everyone in it had simply ceased to exist, vaporized. The next morning, Sunday, I saw one of the tenants from 2A, the guy, Jake, in the hallway getting his mail. I asked him, trying to sound casual and nonchalant, "Hey man, quiet party last night, huh?" Sounded like it ended pretty early or suddenly. Anyway, he gave me a weird, blank look, like I was speaking another language. "Party? What party?" "We just had a couple of friends over for dinner, watched a movie. Everyone was gone by 11, latest. We were in bed by midnight." He seemed genuinely puzzled, or he was a really, really good, convincing actor. Now I was really confused and a little spooked. I knew I'd heard a loud party. The thumping music, the multiple voices, the laughter. Had I dreamt it all? But the sudden jarring silence that had felt so real, so absolute. This bizarre pattern started to repeat itself, maybe once every few weeks. I'd hear the definite, unmistakable sounds of a party starting up into a music, laughter, the murmur of many voices. Then, sometime between 1 and 2 a.m., without fail, everything would just cut off instantly. Dead, unnerving silence. The next day, if I happened to see Jake or his girlfriend, Chloe, in the elevator or the lobby, and cautiously mentioned a noise from the night before, they deny there had been any party at all. Or they do say it was just a quiet get-together with a couple of friends that ended very early. They look at me like I was the crazy one, the one hearing things, the nosy neighbor. I started to seriously doubt my own ears, my own sanity. Was I imagining these parties? Was the stress of my job, the lack of sleep, finally getting to me, causing auditory hallucinations? But the sounds were so distinct, so characteristic of their previous acknowledged parties, and the abrupt, unnatural cessation of those sounds was even more distinct, more unsettling. The building had a vague, old, almost forgotten story about a previous tenant in that very apartment, to a reclusive, eccentric artist who supposedly just disappeared one day, years ago, leaving all his belongings, his unfinished paintings behind. People said you could sometimes still hear strange noises from there, like someone still working, still living in the empty rooms. I'd always dismissed it as typical old building nonsense, the kind of story that attaches itself to any place with a bit of history. Now, I wasn't so sure. What in God's name was going on in that apartment below me? Were the parties a cover for something else entirely? Something illicit? Something that needed to be shut down instantly, silently? If there was any perceived risk, like a noise complaint from another tenant that might bring the building manager or, worse, the police to their door, perhaps those hushed whispers and rumors about illicit activities into just baseless gossip after all. Maybe it was an illegal, high-stakes gambling den that had to clear out in seconds if they got tipped off. Or a drug-related gathering, a pop-up trap house, where things sometimes got out of hand and sudden, complete silence was suddenly imperative for self-preservation. The wrongdoing here, if that's what it was, wasn't the noise of the party itself, annoying as that could be. It was the unnerving mystery of what caused that sudden, total, unnatural silence, and the consistent, almost pathological gaslighting from the tenants when I asked about it. It created a profound sense of unease, of living above something hidden, something unpredictable, and potentially very dangerous. I tried recording the sounds once on my phone, holding it against the floor. I got the muffled party noise, clear enough to be identifiable. But then, when the silence hit, my recording just had silence. It couldn't capture the unnaturalness of it, the sudden, inexplicable void where vibrant sound had just been. It wouldn't convince anyone of anything other than my neighbors finally decided to be quiet. One night, after another party followed by sudden, deafening silence episode, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence from below was so absolute, so heavy, it felt like a physical pressure in my room. I crept down the stairs, my heart in my mouth, and stood outside their door. 2A, listening intently. Nothing, not a breath, not a creak, not a whisper. It was as if the apartment was a vacuum soundproof from the inside. I almost knocked, then thought better of it. What would I say? Hey, did your loud, boisterous party just suddenly stop for no reason again, making my skin crawl? They'd call building security on me. I eventually moved out of the metro lofts. Not just because of the mystery of 2A, but it was a big contributing factor to my general unease in that building. I never found out what was really happening down there. Maybe they were just incredibly efficient, almost supernaturally so, at ending their parties. Maybe I was overly sensitive to sound or lack thereof, but that sudden, inexplicable cut off, that void where noise and life should have been, it was one of the creepiest, most unsettling things I've ever experienced. It wasn't a loud jump scare kind of horror. It was the horror of an unnatural quiet, a silence that hinted at something hidden, something controlled, something that desperately didn't want to be discovered. And the fact that they denied it so consistently, so calmly, made it all the more disturbing. It makes you wonder what secrets your neighbors are really keeping right under your feet, or just through a thin wall, hidden by a sudden, chilling, inexplicable silence.